Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. This is episode 13 in season 15. Today is Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. All right, you guys, so let's get into today's episode. It is only going to be featuring my Newsworthy because not only is it the last Wednesday of the month for the month of July 2025, this particular month featured a lot of headline and newsworthy cases featuring the month's criminal and civil enforcement cases from the Department of Justice that I find newsworthy. So I can't wait to unpack a few of the really notable cases for my audience today. And then, of course, I'm going to go ahead and close out and round out today's episode with a remarkable quote on hopes and aspirations by Seneca. All right, you guys, so let's get into it. The month's fraud, waste, and abuse cases. So the month of July saw a whopping 57 cases as of the recording of this episode. So let's go ahead and check out some of the cases in the spotlight. Early July saw a huge headline case. In case you missed it, Attorney General Alan Wilson announces indictments in $21 million of healthcare fraud schemes. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson announced a multi-jurisdictional partnership called Operation Border War that uncovered and investigated Medicaid fraud schemes that stole more than $21 million from South Carolina taxpayers. An announcement was made as part of the Justice Department's National Healthcare Fraud Takedown that resulted in 324 defendants being charged in connection with more than $14.6 billion in alleged fraud. Federal criminal charges were filed in the Western District of North Carolina against 8 individuals who allegedly conspired to defraud the South Carolina Medicaid program of more than $21 million by filing false and fraudulent reimbursement claims for behavioral health care services that were either inflated or not provided at all. It is alleged that these individuals bought and sold personal identifying information, or PII, of South Carolina Medicaid beneficiaries and submitted reimbursement claims for patients who never knew their information was being used and never received services. There were 7 individuals charged with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and to pay and receive illegal kickbacks. Now, the indictment alleges that the co-conspirators used the fictitious beneficiaries' numbers to file fraudulent reimbursement claims with South Carolina Medicaid for services that were never rendered. It further alleged that the co-conspirators paid bribes and illegal kickbacks to other individuals involved in the scheme, including providers who allowed the defendants to use their NPIs in connection with the filing of fraudulent claims. However, according to the indictment, many of the NPIs used by the co-conspirators belonged to professionals who were not part of the scheme, but were tricked into providing their NPI numbers and credentials to the co-conspirators as part of an application for a job that never materialized. In the state of South Carolina, rendering providers of mental health services are licensed by the South Carolina Department of Labor, Licensing, and Regulations, and most are licensed independent practitioners. The indictment alleges that the defendants were collectively paid over $21 million as a result of the healthcare fraud scheme. It is further alleged that these defendants engaged in a money laundering conspiracy and conducted financial transactions designed to conceal and disguise the nature and source of the payments. For example, it is alleged that kickback agreements and payments were disguised as consulting contracts, payroll, and other seemingly legitimate expenses. If convicted, these defendants face a maximum statutory sentence of 5 years in prison on the healthcare fraud conspiracy count, 10 years in prison on the healthcare fraud counts, 20 years in prison on the money laundering conspiracy count, and 10 years in prison on the money laundering counts. Ultimately, their sentences will be determined by the court based on the advisory sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. An indictment or information here is merely an allegation. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Early July saw a durable medical equipment owner sentenced to 12 years for a $61 million Medicare fraud scheme. Here, a Florida man was sentenced to 12 years in prison and 3 years of supervised release for conspiring to defraud Medicare with false reimbursement claims for durable medical equipment, or DME. He was also ordered to pay upwards of $21 million in restitution and forfeiture in the amount of over $2.5 million. According to court documents, this Florida man owned and operated 5 DME suppliers as a silent partner. He hid his involvement in the companies from Medicare because he had 1 or more felony convictions, making him ineligible to enroll with the government program. To further conceal his involvement, he recruited and paid co-conspirators to serve as nominee owners of the DME suppliers and caused others to falsify Medicare enrollment forms, bank records, and other documents to conceal the true ownership and control of the DME suppliers. He also knew that a co-conspirator paid kickbacks and bribes to patient recruiters in exchange for beneficiary referrals. As part of the scheme, the DME companies submitted approximately $61.5 million in false and fraudulent claims to Medicare for medically unnecessary DME that was ineligible for reimbursement and were paid approximately $26.7 million worth of these claims. Moving on, early July also saw another huge headline. Northern District of Texas. 4 individuals charged in Northern District of Texas with healthcare fraud schemes totaling over $210 million as part of National Takedown. Here, the DOJ announced, The Justice Department announced the results of its 2025 National Healthcare Fraud Takedown, which resulted on July 1st, the Justice Department announced the results of its 2025 National Healthcare Fraud Takedown, which resulted in criminal charges against 324 defendants, including 96 doctors, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and other licensed medical professionals in 50 federal districts and 12 state attorneys general's offices across the United States for their alleged participation in various healthcare fraud schemes involving over $14.6 billion in intended loss. The takedown involved federal and state law enforcement agencies across the country working together and represents an unprecedented effort to combat healthcare fraud schemes that exploit patients and taxpayers alike. Demonstrating this significant return on investment that results from healthcare fraud enforcement efforts, the government seized over $245 million in cash, in luxury vehicles, in cryptocurrency, and in other assets as part of their coordinated enforcement efforts. Now, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, also announced that it successfully prevented over $4 billion from being paid in response to false and fraudulent claims, and that it suspended or revoked the billing privileges of 205 providers in the months leading up to the takedown. Civil charges against 20 defendants for $14.2 million in alleged fraud, as well as civil settlements with 106 defendants totaling $34.3 million were also announced as part of the takedown. Now, as part of the 2025 National Healthcare Fraud Takedown, 4 defendants were charged by indictment in the Northern District of Texas with collective fraudulent billing of approximately $210 million submitted to federally funded programs and other insurers. The first man was charged by indictment with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud in connection with the submission of false and fraudulent medical claims for various benefits, items, and services that were ineligible for reimbursement, not medically necessary, not performed, or not provided. As alleged in the indictment, he submitted the claims to the Department of Labor Office of Workers' Compensation Program, which administers workers' compensation benefits to federal employees who suffered an injury, disease, or death in the performance of duty. He is alleged to have conspired with another physician and a former United States Postal Service employee and union official to submit the false and fraudulent claims. The alleged false claims include claims for knee braces, including several instances where the Department of Labor was billed for multiple expensive custom knee braces for a single claimant. Physical therapy, including an instance where the Department of Labor was billed for multiple hours of physical therapy while the claimant was having knee surgery, as well as platelet-rich plasma treatments and at-home ultrasonic devices that were not medically necessary, never provided, and or not provided as represented. In all, the man and his co-conspirators submitted approximately $19 million in false and fraudulent claims to the Department of Labor, of which at least approximately $17 million was paid. Over $1 million was seized from bank accounts controlled by the man. Let's move on. The second man was charged by indictment with conspiracy to solicit or receive kickbacks for referrals to a federal healthcare program and solicitation and receipt of kickbacks in connection with the submission of over $73 million in false and fraudulent medical claims to Medicare for over-the-counter or OTC COVID-19 tests in 2023. As alleged in the indictment, the man, the owner of medical clinics, conspired with healthcare providers and other individuals to pay and to receive kickbacks based on Medicare reimbursements for these OTC COVID-19 tests. In order to bill for these claims, he and his co-conspirators are alleged to have provided Medicare patient information to which they had access to co-conspirators without the Medicare beneficiary's knowledge or consent, and or notwithstanding that they had not requested any over-the-counter COVID-19 tests. In fact, as alleged in this indictment, in numerous instances, the beneficiary was deceased. Once Medicare paid the claim, his co-conspirator allegedly paid a kickback based on this reimbursement. Let's move on to the third man. The third man was charged by indictment with healthcare fraud in connection with a scheme to submit false and fraudulent medical claims to Medicare for genetic testing that was allegedly never requested, ordered, and or performed. As alleged in this indictment, the man owned a laboratory company in Richardson, Texas, and used the personal identifying information, or PII, of physicians with no relationship to the Medicare beneficiaries and without the physician's knowledge or consent to submit the false and fraudulent claims to Medicare. In all, he caused the submission of approximately $93 million in false and fraudulent claims, of which approximately $65 million was paid, including payment of approximately $13 million over a single 10-day period in 2023. Nearly $6 million was seized from bank accounts controlled by this man. And finally, the fourth man was charged by indictment with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud in connection with the submission of over $25 million in false and fraudulent medical claims to Medicare, TRICARE, and other insurers for electroencephalogram, or EEG, testing. As alleged in this indictment, the man was the owner of a diagnostics company who sought out individuals with insurance plans to undergo expensive EEG testing and recruited and paid kickbacks and bribes to physicians and others to refer patients to his company. To conceal the scheme and to make it appear as the services were necessary, the man and his co-conspirators allegedly falsified diagnoses and falsely labeled kickback payments as loans or as medical directorships or as consultation fees, among other things. The man, through his company, was paid over $5 million for the claims and is alleged to have paid out over $450,000 in illegal kickbacks. An indictment, this information, or complaints here are merely allegations. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Let's move on. Early June saw yet another headline case. Northern District of Illinois. National healthcare fraud takedown results in charges against 324 individuals, including 13 in the Northern District of Illinois. The subheading is Northern District of Illinois defendants charged for nearly $2 billion in fraudulent reimbursements. Now, in this case, 13 defendants in the Northern District of Illinois are facing federal criminal charges as part of the largest national healthcare fraud enforcement action in the Department of Justice's history, and the largest ever in the Northern District of Illinois. The administration has identified healthcare fraud as a top priority for white-collar enforcement. Now, specifically, in the Northern District of Illinois, the 13 defendants are charged with various crimes related to healthcare, with some allegedly participating in fraud schemes involving more than $1.83 billion billed to government programs and private health insurers. The fraud schemes caused the Department of Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration, also called HRSA, Medicare, and other insurers to pay more than $865 million in fraudulent reimbursements. Now, the 13 defendants in Northern Illinois were charged in 5 cases filed in the Northern District of Illinois. Specifically, 4 of the 5 cases involved COVID-19 tests, and I just wanted to highlight one in particular. One case involved men who were indicted for their alleged participation in a $700 million healthcare fraud scheme in which false and fraudulent claims were submitted to Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans for over-the-counter COVID-19 tests, those OTC COVID-19 test kits, durable medical equipment products, as well as genetic tests that were not requested, not medically necessary, and or not provided to the beneficiaries. As alleged in the indictment, a call center in Pakistan was operated by 2 of the men that obtained Medicare beneficiary information, including Medicare beneficiary identification numbers, through theft and deception. The call center then purportedly contacted beneficiaries to obtain patient consent for the durable medical equipment products, COVID-19 test kits, and genetic tests, even though the products and services were often not requested or medically necessary. The purported consent for the COVID-19 test kits was sometimes even faked through artificial intelligence. The men allegedly caused the durable medical equipment providers and laboratories to submit approximately $703 million in fraudulent claims for products and services that were not requested, not medically necessary, or not provided to beneficiaries receiving at least approximately $418 million from Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans. Additionally, some of the men were charged for their alleged participation in a conspiracy to defraud the United States and violate the anti-kickback statute for their sale and distribution of Medicare beneficiary information, including Medicare BINs, to durable medical equipment providers and laboratories in the United States. All 5 men were also charged with participating in a money laundering conspiracy in which fraud proceeds were transferred to various U.S. bank accounts controlled by the defendants in an effort to conceal the source, the location, the ownership, and the control of those funds. Mid-July also saw a Nevada nurse practitioner pleading guilty to fraudulent Medicare wound care billing. Here, a Las Vegas nurse practitioner pleaded guilty to conspiring to fraudulently bill Medicare for amniotic wound allografts for patients that were medically unreasonable and unnecessary in exchange for illegal healthcare kickbacks. According to court documents and admissions made in court by her, she applied medically unnecessary allografts to Medicare beneficiaries that were procured through illegal kickbacks and bribes. She admitted that from September 2022 through April 2024, her wound care company fraudulently billed Medicare approximately $14.3 million, and Medicare paid approximately $9.1 million based on those false claims. At sentencing, she faces a maximum statutory penalty of 5 years in prison. A federal district court judge will determine the sentence after considering the U.S. sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. Let's move on. July also saw Eye Consultants of Pennsylvania agreeing to pay $790,000 to settle False Claims Act allegations. Here, Eye Consultants of Pennsylvania has agreed to pay $790,000 to resolve False Claims Act allegations of civil liability for submitting claims to Medicare for evaluation and management services that violated Medicare rules and regulations. According to the acting U.S. attorney on the case, between September 1st of 2018 and April 7th of the year 2025, the entity submitted claims to Medicare Part B for E&M services on the same date of service for beneficiaries receiving bilateral eye injections in violation of the applicable Medicare rules and regulations. We can move on. July saw an Attorney General, Jeff Jackson, securing over $200 million from Gilead Sciences for paying kickbacks to doctors. Attorney General announces Gilead Sciences will pay $202 million to resolve claims that it paid kickbacks to doctors in exchange for promoting its HIV medications, resulting in millions of dollars of false claims submitted to government health care programs, including North Carolina's Medicaid program. North Carolina's Medicaid program will receive $760,106 from the settlement in principle, which was reached in partnership with the U.S. Department of Justice and 48 other states that came from a qui tam lawsuit. Now, from January of 2011 through November of 2017, Gilead paid kickbacks and provided gifts to healthcare providers who attended and spoke at promotional speaker programs for Gilead's HIV drugs. Gilead paid these speakers who prescribed Gilead drugs at high rates, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to present at events. The company also covered travel expenses for speakers, including those traveling long distances to attractive destinations such as Hawaii, Miami, and New Orleans, and hosted dinners at high-end restaurants. Gilead's internal compliance mechanisms failed to halt these kickbacks. The company's policies and procedures did not prevent sales representatives from improperly offering incentives to get more prescriptions of the company's drugs. Moving on, July also saw Attorney General Bonta securing $1.53 million in settlement with one of the nation's largest hospital systems for unlawful training repayment agreements with nurses. Here, the Attorney General announced a settlement with HCA Healthcare, Inc., resolving allegations that HCA unlawfully required entry-level nurse employees to repay the cost of a mandatory training program if they did not remain employed with the company for 2 years. HCA is one of the nation's largest hospital systems and has several hospitals in Northern and Southern California. The settlement is the result of a years-long investigation by Attorney General Bonta and the Attorneys General of Colorado and Nevada, working in partnership with the Biden administration's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The state's investigation found that HCA violated California employment and consumer protection laws, as well as the federal consumer financial protection laws, by using training repayment agreement provisions, or TRAPs, in nurses' employment contracts. These TRAPs are a form of employer-driven debt, or debt obligations incurred by individuals through employment arrangements. Moving on, July also saw a Louisiana nurse practitioner convicted of a $12 million Medicare fraud scheme. A federal jury convicted a Louisiana nurse practitioner, for her role in an over $12.1 million healthcare fraud scheme to defraud Medicare by ordering medically unnecessary cancer genetic tests for hundreds of patients she never met nor examined. According to court documents and evidence presented at trial, she served as a nurse practitioner and was an enrolled Medicare provider. She held herself out as an expert in Medicare regulations, authoring publications on medical necessity and patient-provider relationships while actively violating those very standards. From 2018 through 2019, she worked as an independent contractor for a company that claimed to provide telehealth services. In her role, the defendant signed hundreds of orders for medically unnecessary cancer genetic testing after brief phone calls, typically lasting less than 60 seconds, and without conducting any physical exams of patients. She falsely diagnosed patients to justify the unnecessary tests, such as diagnosing male patients with cervical cancer that they did not have. She never reviewed any of the test results, including when the results showed that patients actually had variants predisposing them to certain cancers. In furtherance of the scheme, she participated in phone calls, misleading patients into believing they were being screened for cancer at no cost, despite the tests being ordered were not actually diagnosing patients with existing cancer. In doing so, she exploited the trust placed in licensed healthcare professionals and manipulated vulnerable patients. In total, she caused over $12.1 million in fraudulent Medicare claims, and the labs involved in the scheme received over $1.5 million in reimbursements for unnecessary testing. In exchange for signing these orders, she accepted kickbacks and bribes from the telehealth company, payments she later failed to disclose in her bankruptcy petition. She was convicted of 6 counts of healthcare fraud. She is scheduled to be sentenced on November 19th and faces a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison on each count. A federal district court judge will determine any sentence after considering the U.S. sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. And finally, I focus season 15 Spark on hopes and aspirations. I want this 15th season Spark to be filled with our world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone whose words provide us with their insights on hopes and aspirations. So in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from Seneca. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. So very true, right? I love this quote. This quote makes us look a little deeper. It makes us want to do more, be more. It gives us hope that we can do whatever our hearts and minds desire. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. All right, you guys, I'm happy Seneca's spark still burns brightly and continues to inspire so very many. All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I really wanted to highlight the big bonanza cases, right, that were the biggest highlight of the month in healthcare for the whole month of July, in my opinion. Those takedowns are massive. The key takeaways for me in this business of healthcare space, the key takeaways are our providers, our entities, our organizations. Everybody has to conduct their due diligence, right? They are being watched. The new administrations in the future, there's only a limited pot of our Medicare trust funds, right? There's a limited amount of monies, and there continues to be so much fraudulent behavior, wasteful behavior, and abusive behavior. I see it all the time in the everyday work that I perform as a certified professional medical auditor. I see things that are not quite right every single day. And it's a really good thing when you can have a CPMA come in and take a look and help help providers, help entities, help organizations and suppliers of DME, everybody in the behavioral healthcare space, right? Everybody who is still distributing COVID-19 tests for our patients throughout the nation, right? All of those tests are still being administered, those nasal swabs, right? And all of the coordinating lab tests that go out, all of those things I continue to review week after week, month after month in the work that I perform. So, it was a really, really impressive takedown throughout the country. I highlighted just a few pockets of the country, but there were so many providers in different states that were involved as well. And I also wanted to highlight a few of the other stray cases that caught my eye as well that were not a part of the takedown. But I really do hope you take the time and review those very public press releases that I talk about and pull every single month. I review all of the press releases, and I only want to highlight those cases that are either important in the work I do because there's a learning lesson, right? Or it's important to my audience in terms of the greater message, in terms of, what supply is identified, what service line is identified, etc. That ophthalmologic case is a good one for me as well, especially when it comes to those bilateral injections and E&M services, right? I know I've talked about E&M services along with eye injections just for one eye, but this particular case for a entity out in Pennsylvania involved both eyes, right? Both eye injections being performed on the same day. So unless that E&M service was for a completely different body area or body part, right? I don't know the exact details of that case, then something like an E&M with the modifier 25 would be supported if the patients complained about some other body part. But again, why would they if they're coming in to see the ophthalmologist, right? Their specialty is only in the eye. But that is why I pulled a case like that, right? Because as an auditor, as a compliance professional, these are all things that I think about. I dig deeper. I provide a lot more scrutiny as I'm looking at things, right? And I also have that opportunity to ask for more documentation from my clients, from my providers. So they're not just dinged and penalized, right? I like to work side by side, hand in hand with my providers to help them improve their clinical documentation to help support all of those claims that they're sending out. So I really took the time this month to only spend time on the Newsworthy fraud, waste, and abuse cases because this was a big month. A lot of takedowns happened. A lot of those announcements happened on July 1st. And here we are at the end of the month on July 30th. And I could not let another day go by this month without disclosing it to my audience. So there's much more out there on the DOJ website. So please take the time to read these press releases. You might definitely learn something. There's definitely a lot of takeaways that I have at the end of each and every month when I release this information on my podcast. So anyways, you guys, I hope you are going to do something amazing in the next few days. August happens this weekend. So I hope you're planning something fantastic this last month of technically summer, right? Another big month, 31 days for the month of August as well. So I hope you are planning last minute details before your kids' school starts, whatever, all those international vacations, hopefully people are going to. So I really hope you guys are all doing well out there. I know I am. Everything is fine and dandy, and I am enjoying some rain at last after we had quite a few, like 4 or 5 days of high temperatures in the upper 90s with heat indexes over 100. So a little bit torturous, but I'm liking some rainfall today. So anyways, you guys, I hope everything is good out there for you. And I wish you all an amazing and very, very happy week ahead. Thank you so much for listening on today's episode. And I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.